Okay, so for the longest time, this trip traveling, I've not been able to figure out what's going on with my audio and my video was way out of sync. So I put my troubleshooting hat on and I finally figured out what was going on. And now we can get back to doing video. I wasn't going to be able to do this podcast specifically. I like the visual element. Censorship. What's the point? Where are we going with this? Does it really matter? I'm starting to see that now it matters more than ever. So there's been an attack on the biggest podcast platform on the planet, being Joe Rogan. Some people see that as not such a big deal. There's people who don't like Joe Rogan, both sides of the aisle, left and right. There's people who think he's a shill. There's people who think he's a plant. I have a lot of these thoughts sometimes: shill, plant, what somebody is, whether they were placed there, whether they're in the position they are organically. I have some of these same thoughts. But the one thing that I have realized, even with having those thoughts, is my perception of a lot of these things are not perfect. Excuse me as I close some things on my laptop. I don't have a perfect understanding of this stuff. I don't really have a good enough command of all information to have a complete view of the situation. Let's put it that way. And I think a lot of people assume that they have a complete view of situations, whether it be situations that are going on in the world, situations that are going on in politics, situations that are going on in the economy. There's no way for any one of us to know exactly what's happening behind the scenes. We're not privy to this information. And I think it's easy to get into this mode where you think that your understanding is the perfect understanding. We all want to think that. We all want to think that the way we understand these things, the way we see these things are exactly as they are. So when thinking about this Joe Rogan situation and how the media is attacking him so much, I take myself back to Alex Jones. Well, why does Alex Jones matter? Alex Jones was cut off from YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, Facebook. He was cut from banking payment processors. Now think about that. Banking payment processors. Why would they do this to Alex Jones? They pretty much unperson this dude on the internet. If you know anything about Alex Jones' history, you'll know that he has made a lot of outlandish statements, or let's say this, what appeared to be outlandish statements at the time. They appeared to be very just out of the way, out of the ordinary, over the top, conspiracy theory-esque. And lo and behold, as we move forward, time and time again, Alex Jones is proven right about several things, things that would have seemed ridiculous on its face at the time. And now you look back and it's like, oh, well, Mr. Jones was actually correct about whatever respective thing he was talking about. So I can see how it's easy to box somebody in a corner, especially when you have the whole media establishment behind you, right? You have big tech, you have government, you have financial institutions back in your play, back in whatever it is that you believe. Very easy in that instant to get a person up out of here. Very easy. All you have to do, shake a few feathers, shake a few trees, get that person up out of here, done deal. So what I think is, I believe The reason Alex Jones was censored from the internet, two specific reasons. One, his influence was too far and too wide. Even though they were painting him as an extremist every time they got the opportunity, all the different media outlets always painted Alex Jones in a certain light. Maybe he is extreme. Maybe he's not extreme. But why shouldn't you be able to hear what he has to say? Why would a person fear another person's words? If somebody's saying something about me, no matter how inflammatory it is, if it's not true, even let's say, even if it's having an impact on me, if it's not true, I'm not going to give it too much credence. Or I'm just going to come with counter information like, yo, okay, this dude said X, Y, and Z. This is not true. Here's the real deal. Here is what is actual. Here is what actually happened. He gave you this information. He wasn't privy to what actually happened. So let me give you the information as it was really laid out, and let me give you some proof. That's the easiest way to combat that. So that way, instead of trying to shut that person down, people hear that person's side of the story. They hear your side of the story. They hear the facts that you bring, and they think to themselves, oh, okay, well, this dude actually has facts behind what he's saying, and he brought verifiable proof. So what this other person is saying is not true. That's not what they did with Alex Jones. They just said he's crazy. You know what? I'm beginning to realize this. Dave Chappelle said this when he gave up all that money from Comedy Central, went off to Africa, decided to do his own thing. One of the things he said is, one of the ways that they try to get a person up out of here, especially when a person is not going with the narrative, when they're not going along with what the mainstream is saying, one of the things they do is they call you crazy because it's dismissive. You call a person crazy. Notice that anybody who is thought outside the box is always considered crazy. Oh, this dude crazy. He's lost his mind. And the reason they call a person crazy, and the reason they say this person has lost their mind, is because they don't go with the established narrative. They go the opposite direction. Everybody's going left. They say, you know what? There's something over here on the right that we probably need to pay attention to. Why is that always perceived as a bad thing? Always. And from everything I've seen in every instant, when somebody thinks outside the box, when they think the opposite direction of everybody else, automatically they're crazy, dismiss. This is wild. Now, on a psychological level, I think it's commonplace that humans fear what they don't understand. A lot of us do that. I've been guilty of that. Something comes along I don't understand, and instead of hearing a person out, immediately I say, oh, they bugging, they crazy. I'm not trying to hear that. What I've started doing, at least myself, this is something that I seek to practice, is when someone says something that I find maybe slightly outlandish or out of the realm of what I know to be the established way we think about something or we approach something, I hear a person out because it's not missed by me, especially now, that maybe the way we've been doing this is not the best way, the most efficient way. And maybe we're just so stuck in our ways that we can't see that this person is actually correct about what they're saying. And I think that plays a part. I think there's another part. The world is a big place. The label conspiracy theory is thrown around so people don't question things, right? When you hear conspiracy theory, your immediate thought behind that is, this person is crazy. That's your thought. This is what we have been trained to think of people who think differently, who think out of the way, who think out of the box, who don't have the established narrative frame of mind. And that's what happened with Alex Jones. But I think it was more nefarious with Alex Jones. I think he was having influence. And this is the influence he was having. It wasn't necessarily that people believed everything he said, right? Because I'm not going to tell you everything he said was correct. Alex Jones can be a little extreme. But what he began to do and what he began to have an effect on is people begin to question everything. They didn't necessarily agree with him, but it was like, yo, this dude is asking questions I've never heard before. So now you're looking at things and you're like, well, I don't know about this. I don't know if I agree with that. This is how this relates to Joe Rogan. Alex Jones, I'm not going to say single-handedly, but in the 2016 election, I would say that Alex Jones really did have a monumental effect on how that election played out. Not in that everything he was saying was correct. That's not the case. And it's also not in that everything he said was exactly in line with what people were thinking. But this is what did happen. As people heard Alex Jones speak, and I can speak for myself, I'm definitely in this category. I began to ask myself questions like, yo, maybe there's something to this question that he's asking, and maybe he's not necessarily 100% right about what he's saying, but maybe I need to question what I was told because something isn't right. And I don't know what it is, but something isn't right. I think this happened to many people. That presents a problem. In my opinion, this presents a problem for establishment players who want people to think a certain way, who want people to view things in a certain way, and who want people to accept whatever it is they have pushed as the established truth. Right? Like this term we've heard over the past 3 years, trust the science. What does that even mean? Science is to be questioned. This is how discovery is made. This is how we get to the truth, by questioning everything. Is this true? Right? This is what's funny. When I was in high school, I'd say junior high and high school, one of the things that I was taught about science, and I don't think this is the case now, is that you ask questions. That's how you get to the truth. If somebody has a hypothesis, if somebody has a theory, you question everything. You find whatever hole you can find, and whatever it is that they're teaching, whatever conclusion they came to, maybe their conclusion is right, maybe their conclusion is wrong, but you're going to get to the bottom of it. And I remember thinking, yo, okay, yeah, I can rock with this. I can definitely rock with this because this is how you actually get to correct or proper information. Let's put it that way. But what has begun to happen is now we have this idea and this theory that we can't question anything. Nothing is to be questioned. So this is how, fast forward, this is how this comes to Joe Rogan. And there's another popular podcaster, Tim Pool, that factors into this as well. And I'll explain how. So Joe Rogan is not left. Joe Rogan is not right. Although I would probably say he leans more left than he does anything. I would say Joe Rogan, even though that is the case, he's not left and he's not right or center in this regard. Joe Rogan will talk to anybody who can have an interesting conversation and is willing to come on his podcast and be challenged, because he's not going to leave you unchallenged. And he talks to people across many political spectrums. And he has conversations with people on a myriad of issues. And this is what he does. He forces people to ask questions they would not normally ask. Right? He makes people think about things that they wouldn't normally think about, question things that they wouldn't normally question. And you begin to realize, oh, maybe this established narrative I had of what I thought or perceived to be true about a given situation is not the case. So he does the same thing. And I think he does it in a more professional manner I'm not saying that he is perfect, but I think in a more professional manner, Joe Rogan, with the conversations he has, is not even necessarily him. It's the broad spectrum of guests he has on his show. Because what that does, that makes it hard for them to paint him in a specific corner. You can't say Joe Rogan is X. You can't say Joe Rogan is Y. Because if you try to paint him in a corner and say that this is where he's at politically or socioeconomically, then he'll have a guest on that is like complete opposite spectrum of that. And they're having a conversation. So what it does is it forces you to have a more a well-rounded view of situations. It forces you to go, okay, wait, I did think this, and I may be right in this area, but there may be something about this I'm not right about. And what he said and what the conversation he had surrounding this guest has now made me question what was the foundation of what I thought. You can get to the truth when you're in that situation, right? Here's one of my proofs of that. Joe Rogan, I'm a believer. Those who follow, me on this podcast, you know this. Joe Rogan has probably been one of the biggest critics of Christianity specifically and the Bible namely. But in all of the conversations he has and in all of the conversations that has played out with many different people, in comes one Mr. Jordan Peterson, who's having I wouldn't call it an existential crisis, but he's having a moment where God is really getting a hold of Jordan Peterson's mind. And here Jordan Peterson comes into Joe Rogan's podcast and starts talking to him about the God of the Bible, the validity of the Bible, the ultimate truth of Scripture. The reason these things can happen is because Joe Rogan is having open conversations. Now, my criticism of Joe Rogan is he never seems to or appears to have any modern day Christian apologists on. He makes his statements about the Bible, about God, about Christianity, and he drops his bombs and he lets it fly, and he rarely has anyone on with a counter argument. But because his podcast is filled with so many different personalities and so many different thought processes, those counter arguments work their way to his podcast anyway, whether he liked it or not, because he's having so many conversations. This is what the establishment does not want. So it surfaces a video with him using racial term. I can use it, but I'm not going to say it, just for sake of saying it. Videos of him using a certain racial term that us black people use toward one another. But he wasn't calling anyone this. He was referencing the word in the context of somebody said it or somebody put it on the title of something. I have no problem with him saying a word in that context. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to keep it 100% real with you. Even if he said it in a derogatory context, I'm not saying it's right, but I'm not going to be so bent out of shape that I lose sleep over this. And then here's the next thing. So a Planet of the Apes joke surfaces and people get all up in arms. The dude is a comedian. He made a joke referencing Planet of the Apes and black people. I was not offended. I was not offended even remotely. If you're going to be offended at that, you have to be offended at every black person you have ever heard that told a white joke, and you've heard them. So if you're not going to be offended at that, don't be a hypocrite. When it comes to comedy, everybody is open game. That's how it always was supposed to be. This is where we laugh at each other and we get over this nonsense. The problem for the establishment is that Joe Rogan has such a huge platform and he's having such nuanced conversations that the narrative that the establishment is pushing is breaking down and they can't control it. So this is where Tim Pool comes in. Tim Pool is another podcaster, very big, has conversations across the spectrum with many different people. Tim Pool has been swatted, I want to say like 4 or 5 times now. If you don't know what swatting is, look it up. I did a video on that. I'll link the video that I did on that at the end of this video. Needless to say, why is he being attacked so vehemently? For the same reason. He has conversations that forces you to look at the established narrative and you begin to realize, this is not necessarily what it is. What they've been telling me is not necessarily what it is. And I'm now seeing that things are actually much different. The establishment does not want people like that to be able to thrive at all. They want these people cut from existence. And here's the problem. The problem is we assume benevolence and supreme knowledge by people in the establishment. We assume that they know so much, that they have everything figured out, and to the nth degree, they can stop everything. And this is what you have to realize. A lot of the elites, a lot of the people in the establishment grew up without the internet and balked at the internet for a long time. The internet didn't come around until about my 10th grade year in high school. And even then, people didn't really have computers like that. So I would say it wasn't until I was around 22, 23 that the internet was like officially global. It was in almost every household. It was rare that you find a household that didn't have the internet. That wasn't until I was about 23. But still, I'm still young enough that I grew up with this internet. There was a time when it wasn't a thing. Then the internet became popular. I learned the ins and outs of the internet, and I kind of grew and matured with it. But you have to think, a lot of the elites are really older people that did not like the internet, that did not like what they saw from the internet. They didn't think it was a good thing. And so they didn't really get too well versed in it, but they still controlled everything. So to some degree, they control the internet. Along comes social media. Along comes citizen journalists. Along comes something called the Wayback Machine. If you've never looked at the Wayback Machine, if something is deleted from a website, if there was an article was on a website and it's not there anymore and you don't know how to find it, you go to the Wayback Machine. It's like archive.org, I think is what. If you type in Wayback Machine on Google, you'll find it. And you type in that website and it has a snapshot of that website from whatever specific time. So whatever was removed, there was a snapshot of that recorded on the internet, and you can still find that information. Once something is on the internet, I'm not going to say it's forever. God is the only thing that is forever. The Bible says, from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. Again, this is not my Bible podcast, so I'm not going to go deep into that. But when you post something on the internet, it's there. Then there is no just scrubbing it. This is why you got to watch what you post and you got to watch what you put out there. If you're not willing to live with that forever, you might not want to post it. I don't think a lot of these establishment players realized early enough on the exact grasp of the internet, and it's too late. And now they're trying to get their stranglehold around this, but it's too late. Look at what's going on in the Ukraine, right? When you think about this, what's going on in the Ukraine, this is the first time in modern history that a war is being fought or a war is being established in the hyper social media age. So information is coming out very fast, very fast. And a lot of the propaganda is breaking down in real time. They'll put out, like, I don't know if you've seen anything from the Miss Ukraine, the Ukrainian model who was holding this gun, and people pointed out, hey, That's a Daniel Defense airsoft rifle. She ain't doing nothing with that. And they were trying to make it seem like she was entering the fight and this is a fight for freedom. Now, I'm not saying it's not necessarily a fight for freedom. I don't know all the ins and outs of what's going on in the Ukraine. But what I do know is we don't need to get so hyper involved that this thing turns into a world war. Everybody needs to chillax. What you think about Putin might not be 100% accurate. Every country has propaganda. So obviously all the countries who are against him are going to want their propaganda to thrive. I'm not telling you what he's doing is right. What I'm saying is the establishment's ability to on the fly manipulate people, it's still there, but it's beginning to break down because a lot of these Ukrainian narratives, freedom fighters, X, Y, and Z, is breaking down in real time. They're not garnering the support for intervening from the regular person because regular people are getting so much information that they're like, wait a minute, I don't know about this. And the powers that be cannot stand that. This is why censorship is such a big deal now. Is not necessarily about a left-right paradigm, so to speak, even though the tendency is to ban and censor more right-wing commentators. I'm not naive. I understand that that's the case, but I don't think it's necessarily a left-right thing. I think the problem is anyone who comes out and challenges the thought process of the establishment to the point where people begin to question, they want to shut that down. And their precursor to that, they started this with Alex Jones. He was the test case, and he said that. I remember him saying, if they can do this to me, they can do it to you. And nobody was paying attention. And here we go.